Members, I think, thank you, Harry. Now you've got your next task, which is the East-West Link. We will now go back to item 11, which is on 33, and that's the Karaka Drury plan change. And welcome Barry to join John.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Actually, I want to get my order right here. Members, I think it would be more appropriate if I take Andy Baker at the outset. Staff, you don't need to vacate. Andy, would you like to take that mic and make your submission? Apologies, Andy, and we've kept you for a while, so...
I didn't turn up thinking it was going to be a short day, Mr. Chair, so it's always good to hear what's... and it was exciting listening to some of the stuff this morning and about the sort of the town or the city centre, and interesting now to talk about the other end of Auckland, I suppose. And so I'm here to talk on behalf of the local board and very much in favour of the council accepting this private plan change. We've discussed this at quite a bit of at length, and really see the benefit in this plan change being able to go ahead. We've been, as a board, really well engaged with the developer Charles Maher, and it was good to hear him this morning and to see him in front of you. And I know Kathy was pleased to see that a developer actually coming before the governing body, because it sometimes doesn't happen. And if there's one thing I can say about Charles is his willingness to engage with the local board from the very first instance of his SHA. The thing I think that that resonated with us was some of the things he was planning in that SHA and some of the things that he was talking about. The ability to for people to own a house and to be able to add on to that house as their needs change, which you don't often see now in new developments. It's how we used to live. And how we used to have a house and we'd add a bedroom when we needed one. And that was one of the things that Charles talked about when he first came to us, and it was one of the things that the local board were very, very impressed with. And we've been impressed the whole way through, to be fair. We see what's happening in Drury. It is a huge, huge area of development. I think it's a rural area at the moment, Mr. Chair, so you might be able to call it what is it? Adaptive urbanism. I think that's you like that sort of saying, don't you? But it's an adaptive urbanism. We're changing and progressively, looking at how we change our things. There you go, Kathy. On my head, when we look at that, we've opened the door with the SHA in an area where there has been required a significant amount of investment, I guess, in infrastructure, and borne by the developer and other developers in the area, with Drury South not far away, also having to make some fairly big investments in their part of the world. So we've opened that door, and to close it, semi-close it now, just doesn't make sense. The future urban zone in the unitary plan was probably, when you think back about how councils have looked forward and planned ahead, or maybe not, over generations. The future urban zone was probably quite revolutionary, that we were looking that far ahead. I think we're now faced, as we know, that we were probably looking a long way ahead, where actually some of that stuff's happening a lot quicker. And apparently it's very, very important now for people to be visionary. And I think with Charles Maher, we have someone who's visionary for this part of the world. I have a bit of buy into it because I've lived there all my life, and my family are fourth generation in Drury, so I have a little bit of knowledge about the place. And I'm extremely excited to see it go from what it is, which is not a flash part of Auckland, to be fair, and I'm very excited about what's possible in that part of the world. And so this will be the enabler. This plan change, I believe, will be the enabler for a lot of work that will mitigate some of the problems and the concerns that the community have in terms of transport, and rightly so. It's one of the things we've discussed with Charles from day one. And, but this plan change will enable some things to occur that will mitigate a lot of those concerns. And, we are very much in favour of it being accepted. and appreciate the work done by the staff. I don't think that, this has had a lot of attention, be fair to say, over the past few months, and I think the outcome and the report has ended up in the right space and saying the right things, and gives you a pretty clear steer, I think. So local board's very much in favour of it. As a local, I'm very much in favour of it, so I urge you to accept the plan change. Thanks.
Thank you, Andy. Any questions of Andy?
You had me at hello.
Rubenism, is it, Andy?
Urbanism, adaptive urbanism.
You got a patent on that? Yeah. Okay, thank you. So the motion is, I've got a signal of it being moved, and that's by the Deputy Mayor. Moved by the Deputy Mayor. Do I have a second?
Yeah.
Councillor Newman, thank you. And we've read the report. John, do you want to take us through an intro on this, or do you?
I have about a 5-slide presentation.
Yeah, you do have 5
with
slides.
one on infrastructure from John Dunshee from the DPO, if you like.
Thank you.
Okay. Right, so, well, I guess just to start, as Andy mentioned, it has been quite a challenge working this one through, and I'll touch on the reasons why in a second, but we've got up on the screen here the Future Urban Land Supply Strategy adopted by the committee a couple of months ago, which has a map showing the different areas, and you probably can't read it on the screen, but, and my pointer isn't working either, which is not that helpful. So the Drury West area, which is where the private plan change sits, is to the west of Drury Township, north of Pukekohe, and on the southern edge of the Manukau Harbour. It's shown orange there. Unfortunately, I don't have the pointer. That's a real nuisance. But anyway, it's signalled in the Falls as being development ready by 2020. There we go. So orange spot here. So it is in one of the early tranches of the Future Urban Land Supply Strategy, but the date 2022, we're not there yet. And at Planning Committee last month, you endorsed a structure plan exercise for the Pukekohe area, the Drury-Oberheki area, Silverdale West and Warkworth in the north. So we've embarked on structure planning for this area, and then here before you, you have a rezoning request in the future urban zone while we're just in the early stages of commencing the structure planning for that Drury-Oberheki area. So it is challenging in that respect. Just to sort of drill in a bit more closely, so the yellow is future urban land in the unitary plan. So that area there is what we refer to as Drury-Oberheki, and the structure and the Drury West area is in the Future Urban Land Supply Strategy. That orange blob that I showed on the previous map is this area here. The southern part of Drury West and to the east of State Highway 1 here, Oberheki area, in terms of the falls, is not signalled to be development ready for probably another decade or so. So positive in the sense that it's, I guess, 2022, not well beyond, but still a bit of a challenge. This map here is also showing, this is the live zoned special housing area, Bremner Road SHA, so that has an urban zoning, I think tourist and apartment zoning, mixed housing around it. The private plan change relates to these pieces of land here with the B1 annotation on them. So it's not all of the Drury West area, it's just these two parcels of land here that are subject to this private plan change request. So just to recap, we've embarked on structure planning for the entire yellow area shown on the screen. The full signals Drury West, the northern area, is being development ready by 2022. So I'll just hand over to John to very quickly touch on infrastructure, because that's obviously a key element of the timing in the Future Urban Land Supply Strategy.
Afternoon, Chair. So I just want to run through briefly a few key pieces of infrastructure that are going in on the Auranga development site that will not only serve that but also serve the wider area. The first of those is the Bremner Road pump station, which is referred to in the report, and which will be built by Charles Maher and his team, and is intended to serve not only his development but a wider area, giving a capacity that would serve up to or at least 10,000 people. So at the moment there's an agreement that's almost been reached with Water Care Services Limited, Charles Maher and some of the landowners and developers to the east of State Highway 1, namely Fulton Hogan, Kiwi Income Property Trust and Stevenson's. So that would be a jointly funded pump station serving, which would be able to serve that wider area. In addition to that, land has been reserved adjacent to that pump station. That's to enable the capacity to be increased to at least another 10,000, to serve at least another 10,000 people. So at some stage in the future, when that's required, Watercare Services Limited will construct that pump station. In addition, as part of the agreement, Watercare Services Limited have agreed to provide the increased capacity in the gravity sewers serving the pump station. So all those three things together serve not only Charles Mars or the Auranga land, but also the wider area. And so Watercare Services Limited, by doing this, has been able to plan ahead and put in the infrastructure now, rather than having to go back and redo it in order to take account of increased requirements because of growth in the area. Further to the east, in addition, it's another pump station proposed for wastewater, which will serve the potential development, or the development at Stevenson's and the potential development undertaken by Kiwi Income Property, Fulton Hogan and indeed Drury. In addition to that, in relation to freshwater, there is a bulk supply point. I was just looking for the right terminology. A bulk supply point proposed at Flanagan's Road, just to the south, which will serve, which will take water from the Waikato main trunk and provide fresh water to the Auranga land and land to the east of State Highway 1. And importantly, it will also pass through the Auranga land to provide fresh water for the Hingaya Peninsula. So the line will go under the creek and across and through into the Hingaya Peninsula, where it will meet up with the Henua bulk supply point, thereby providing a robust freshwater supply to that area, which up to this point has been constrained because of the need for fresh water. Stormwater is largely being dealt with as a matter of a course. There are no significant stormwater issues that have been raised. In terms of transport, there are a number of provisions within the precinct plan for the area that Auckland Transport have been working through with Auranga, and these are dealt with it with various key points, up to 50 houses, up to 100 houses, up to 400 houses. Auckland Transport are confident that those are in hand. I suppose the most significant of those is a proposed cycleway and footpath across State Highway 1 that needs to be provided. Sorry?
Cycleway across State Highway 1?
Yep, cycleway and footpath, so across the Bremner Road. So that can be built either adjacent to the existing Bremner Road bridge or independently. You'll also see on the map there, you'll see a dotted line, and so that's a road that is required as part of AT's Transport for Future Urban Growth or Growth Alliance work. That's a key road that serves not only a sort of a distributor purpose, but also as a major bus route. Currently, that's part of being negotiated with AT through Auranga A, and it is intended that it will then be taken through Auranga B, which is the private plan change bit, to Jesmond Road. Charles Marr will construct it as a collector road, and then AT will come in after that and improve the road as required to meet increased capacity requirements. And finally, there is a junction between State Highway 22 and Jesmond Road that needs improvement, and Charles Marr has agreed to undertake that work as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, John. Okay. Anything further to add, John?
All right. Just a few more slides. So at this point in time, council is required to make a decision to either accept, adopt, reject, or treat the request as a resource consent application. I think you're reasonably familiar with that process, although this is the first private plan change request, apart from the Three Kings that you've just considered, to come before the committee, so I guess it's the second now. The analysis of those options is contained in the report, but just in terms of rejecting a private plan change request, which was certainly an option on the table in light of the fact that this is proceeding ahead of the council's structure plan exercise and the council rezoning the land. So this is the issue we looked at very carefully. Under the RMA, these are the matters that we have to look at. Is it frivolous or vexatious? The report concludes it's certainly not frivolous or vexatious. A lot of work has gone into the application, and development is already underway on the adjacent land, so not a reason there. Has the substance of the request been considered in the last 2 years? Well, for part of the land, rezoning was considered through the Hasher legislation and was rejected, but this is a reduced proposition in terms of its overall scale. It's avoiding some of the tricky areas of land in terms of what the future land use might be. So it's quite a different proposition. So the report recommends not to reject on the grounds that it's been partially considered in the last 2 years. We believe that it is in accordance with sound resource management practice on the face of it, so not a reason to reject there. A number of other matters covered in detail in the report, but in conclusion, no grounds to reject the private plan change request. So we are recommending to accept the request for 4 key reasons. First of all, the land is immediately adjacent to an existing area that's been rezoned through the special housing area legislation. It's essentially an extension of that current development rather than a brand new proposition within the future urban zone. The private plan change was lodged before the council last month endorsed the structure planning timeframes for a number of parts of Auckland, including the Juri-Opaheki area, and we don't believe that a residential use of the land as requested under this private plan change request forecloses other better outcomes that we might get through the structure plan exercise. So that's a key test. Are we actually foreclosing a better, more holistic look at the Juri West area or the even wider Juri-Opaheki area? We're saying no. And the last 2 points, it's not creating a situation where we're live zoning or giving an urban zoning to land where the bulk infrastructure is still a long way off. The bulk infrastructure, as you've heard from John Dunshay, is already very well scoped, and work has been happening with Charles Marr, other developers, Watercare and AT on that front, and that will continue in parallel if the committee decides to accept this request. And lastly, in terms of rejection, as I mentioned before, we don't see any reasons why the council, having regard to case law, should reject this request. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Questions, members? Therefore, I'll hand to Deputy Mayor.
Just very, very quickly, we heard from Charles and Helen this morning. You heard from our staff today. So this is perhaps not unusual, but it's not common either. What we've seen here is an area in Drury that has massive infrastructure going through it already. It has State Highway 1 adjacent to this development, which is the government's through its announcements recently is going to treble lane right the way through to Pukekohe. It has rail adjacent. It has gas adjacent, high voltage power adjacent, and massive other developments adjacent. Stevenson's is adjacent, which has 5,000 to 6,000 jobs potentials, and that many again swinging off the creation of those primary jobs. You've heard about what Charles's endeavours to do about affordable housing, 15% on one and 10% on the other. And I love this final saying, which is streets for people, not roads for cars. And if you haven't already, do look up the Oranga website and look at the visions and the statements and what his design principles are there. It is quite enlightening. We need a lot more houses in this city. 30,000 they say is the shortfall. This is but a start, but it's a good start. And I've been working with this development. I think we first met in the cafe in Drury 4 or 5 years ago with Charles and his team, and it's been an ongoing piece of work. This gives it scale, this gives it scope, this gives it opportunity to progress faster and bigger. Commend it, Mr Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Newman.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Chair, and I want to acknowledge Barry Mosley for his authorship of this report, which is another very good report coming from the planning group. So thank you, Barry, and thank you, John, and everyone involved. This, of course, was part of the area governed by the Legacy Papakura District Council, and it's a product of the changes that have taken place at the local government commission some years ago, moved this part of Drury into what is now the Franklin ward, well served by Councillor Cashmore. I think if there was ever going to be adjustments in the future, we'd have to revisit that, because I think that there are real synergies with the existing communities of Drury and Papakura. And the reason why I support this is for the reasons that were outlined by Mr Dunshay, that the need for the transmission infrastructure to service this area from the perspective of water is essential to provide the bulk transmission infrastructure for the water that will be required, not only for the Drury 1 precinct and B1, B2, but also for the live zone location north of Oranga at Hengaia. And that's very important, Mr Chair, because of course Hengaia has been live zoned. We have live zoned a great big tract of Papakura without having the infrastructure to deliver it. And you can see the colour coding after para 6 in the report. We're talking about a private plan change for future urban, but that investment from a private developer for the servicing of future urban, Mr Chair, is essential to deliver the very infrastructure that's required for the live zoning in Hengaia to the north of the creek. And I frankly think that if we're going to live zone parts of Auckland, we ought to have a plan in place to deliver the infrastructure and not rely on a private plan change and funding from a private developer to enable that. I think there needs to, we need to reflect what we can deliver first in the live zones location. However, Mr Chair, I think that I don't agree with the Papakura Local Board's view, which is set out at paragraph 67 in the report. I think that the infrastructure is needed for the reasons set out, and I don't think these matters are premature. I think these matters are very present, and the development is taking place. What will be interesting, and I hope the officers are really going to my expectation will be that with the private plan change that is going to be proposed, that we're accepting here, my view is that we will face challenges for the area east of State Highway 1 sooner than a decade. I think that that will come on much sooner, or the pressure for that to come on will be sooner than that, and that we will need to, in the not too distant future, visit the timing of the structure planning that will be required for the sequence of that location, because it will be driven, I think, by commercial imperatives that make this footprint in our part of Auckland very attractive for the market, and we will have to provide the planning and the public infrastructure to facilitate that.
Thank you. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure. Very quick question first, Mr Chair. Given that this area sits within a larger area that requires structure planning, can you envisage a collaborative process with Oranga so that conceivably the council could benefit with some of the scale that they're adding and some of the innovative thought?
Through the chair, that's exactly what we're starting to discuss with Charles and his team, but also the other strong development interests that you've heard. Kiwi Income Property Trust, a very big developer have land in this area, only purchased in the last 12 months, I think. Fulton Hogan in this area and Stevenson. So between those four and potentially some others, there is scope for a very positive collaborative exercise through this next 12 months of structure planning. So hopefully, yes, hopefully a very positive approach where we get consensus between all parties and hopefully an agreed structure plan in 12 months' time.
Okay, that being the case, then I'd like to speak in support of this process. I see the opportunity for significant innovation based on what I've heard earlier, and also the possibility, especially as it goes to reserve acquisitions, for acquiring land early on the part of the developer, so that we have more generous reserve areas than what we see, particularly when we've got limited developments. And I know I've spelt that out before, but essentially what we're seeing across much of Auckland is maybe 1, at most 2% in terms of reserve area, when in the past, through the Reserves Act, we had as much as 7.5%. So I would hope that there are some outstanding features here, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Member Blair.
Kia ora koutou. I just want to note that the consultation has been done early, which is great to see, as back as 2015 with the local iwi. It's been ongoing, and the assessment packages have been completed, and those areas being identified as being important to them in terms of archaeology, the stormwater treatment, management of the waterways, the wastewater management and naming opportunities and natural reserves in nearby offshore islands is to be commended, and we just encourage more ongoing work with the local iwi there.
Thank you, members. There being no further speakers, I'll put those motions then. Moved by...
I had a question.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. I thought we'd made eye contact earlier.
Good, good.
Okay.
Councillor Sayers.
Thank you very much. And it's really just it's a question, just really picking up on the points of Councillor Newman, probably Councillor Walker as well, and also acknowledging John, you and your team for an excellent presentation. It's most informative. Thank you for that and the elaborations you've made there, and obviously Andy coming in as well, and also for Mr. Maher and his team of representatives. But my question's probably around the, and I think you've answered it, John. I just want to make sure that I've understood correctly, that we're going to have the structure plan done at some stage for the whole of the yellow area that you pointed out earlier on the map. Mr. Maher's been able to come along and at his cost, resources and time construct a structure plan. And now there's other players in that space down there as well, and the other yellow areas there, and you've mentioned their names. So does that mean that we're at, rather than using your resources, cost and time, John, that we can do more, I guess, that private input into creating that master structure plan? That I think I heard you correctly, that you're quite keen to see that actually happen. Is that a new process for council that we can start to get into, or is that not a new model?
Through the chair, working closely with stakeholders is how we do business as a council and how previous councils have done business as well. In terms of structure planning, which you do for these greenfield areas, there is a history of trying to work very closely with the landowners to achieve a mutually agreed outcome. So, I mean, there may be some efficiencies that we can achieve by tapping into some of the work that their experts have already done looking at the land. But no, it's not a case of handing it over completely to the four main landowners, because there are other stakeholders. Mana Whenua very clearly will have a view. Perhaps some of the businesses in the old Drew Township will have a view as to the future of the wider area. So, yes, there are four major players that we're aware of, but there will be others. So, it'll still be council-led, but hopefully in as collaborative a way as possible is our goal.
Okay, all right, John. That helps clarify it for me. Thank you. Thank you.
Members, I probably just do want to say that there is no precedent being set with accepting this plan change. Absolutely no precedent. And you'll recall at a very recent meeting we said that structure planning is paramount. Not an option, it is paramount. but there are unique circumstances in this regard, and if you look at the parcels of land, B1, B2, they're up in that northwest section where the boundary is water mostly. And the paragraphs, which I've lost right now, the staff have carefully reflected on what we decided last time about structure planning being paramount, and they have given good specific reasons why in this case and in this case only it is appropriate to proceed to accept this plan change. So I just want to reiterate that there is no precedence here.
Aye.
So it's put it to the vote. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Thank you. Thank you, officers. Thank you, Andy. Go to page 317, members. It's item 13.